Alright, so this is the last match I'm going to show you today. This is a keepable hand, I think. With the Fatal Push to start out into Wall of Omens. Against an aggressive deck, we have the answers. It doesn't look like an aggressive deck. Oh, Border Post. This must be a Restore Balance deck. Because they have, yeah, okay. So this is going to be interesting. These creature removal spells might not be optimal. Game one kind of feels like it might be rough. Liliana, that's one of our better cards in the matchup, I would assume. This is against Jeff Hoogland, actually, who's I think one of the most creative deck builders in the game. Him and Saffron Olive are two that I always like seeing what decks they're up to because they always kind of come up with either find or come up with these brews that somehow they make them work, and I always find that interesting. I can appreciate that as a sort of creative sort of deck builder myself. I think their ranges are a little higher than mine. You know, mine are always like white creatures in every possible way you can imagine, and in many ways you could never even imagine. But theirs are just a lot of times crazy decks. So he's up to something. All right, Thassa, interesting. So I just want to jam Liliana, see what's going on. He's got Greater Garganon, so it's almost certainly natural Restore Balance. So they discard Leyline, play Ardent Plea, Restore Balance. So we lose some lands, but that's okay. We have Liliana and Gideon. So Liliana ticks up. They go down to 2 cards, discard basically another Restore Balance. We fetch Collective Brutality, see what their last 2 cards are. It's Jace and Outburst, so we leave them with a Jace. And then we're going to prevent from Thassa because they have 1, 2, 3. So if they draw land and play Jace, they could activate Thassa. Thassa becomes a 5/5 and can attack either our planeswalkers. So we need to prevent that. And if they don't draw land for their Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is their last card in hand, then if they play their card, then we can take up Liliana and have them discard the Jace. Otherwise, we can ultimate the Liliana and put them in a really difficult spot. So basically leave them with not a lot going on. And if they play the Jace, though, Thassa becomes active, but then Gideon threatens to attack it for 4, so they can't even brainstorm, really. So it looks like we're in reasonable shape. Let's see what happens, though. So Thassa scries, they're more likely to find a land. They do find it. They Jace, and like I said, they could not brainstorm because if they brainstorm, then we just minus Liliana, the sack creature. We make Gideon a 4/4 and we attack Jace to death. But here, we could ultimate Liliana. I'm not really sure how we would separate because what would we do? Leave them with like Jace and Thassa or nothing, or everything else, I mean. So then we'd basically be killing Jace and Thassa, trading that for Liliana, and they would just have the 4 lands, or not the 4 lands, but like the 2 lands, 2 border posts, and the Ardent Plea. That's something we could do, or they might keep Jace Thassa, in which case we could attack Jace down to 1, and the next turn attack Jace down to dead. I figured the better line was minus to kill Thassa and attack Jace down to 1. I don't know if that's correct. It might have been correct to ultimate Liliana there. So they brainstorm, play their own Gideon, preventing damage from our Gideon. So plus Liliana. They play Nahiri. That's a good one. We draw an uncastable Planeswalker, discard it. Brainstorm again. Fetch. Activate Nahiri. Now we go ultimate. So I'm thinking here, Nahiri's basically going to beat us. I'm pretty sure that he has an Emrakul. So, I mean, I could just go Nahiri or nothing, but they're, I mean, I would think that they're going to take the Nahiri no matter what. So I try to, I don't know, like, I don't think it really matters. Like, we're going to lose if they take the Nahiri pile anyway. I tried to make it where if they took the non-Nahiri pile, they wouldn't still beat us, is basically what I was trying to do there. So yeah, they ultimate Nahiri, get Emrakul, and kill us. So that was, I think that the turn maybe that we messed up was, we should have just ultimated Liliana and said you get like Jace and Thassa or your 4 mana sources. I think that was probably right to do. But then they draw Nahiri, and then we still have Gideon to pressure the Nahiri though, so I don't know, it's tough. Like I never played against this deck before. I don't know that anyone has. But he got me. So that was game 1. The way we sideboarded, and again, not sure this is correct. This was kind of on the fly. I took out the 3 Fatal Push, one of the Path to Exiles, the Bonsi's Reckoning, the Day of Judgment, the Wrath of God, the Damnation, and the Settle the Wreckage. So basically the 5 Wraths, the 3 Fatal Pushes, and a Path to Exile. Left in the other 2 paths for Gargadon, and because I basically didn't really have even more stuff to bring in, I brought in the 3 Stony Silence, the Fragmentized Disenchant, Anguish Unmaking, and 3 Surgicals. So I figured being able to kill border posts is good enough for the Stony, the Fragmentized, and the Disenchant. And then the Anguish Unmaking can kill, you know, lots of stuff. It's definitely worth bringing in. And then the Surgical Extraction, basically, I figured was a way to basically get them. So there's some, like, Surgical isn't super great, but we have our discard spells, and we could have them discard. Like, let's say we Inquisition them and see that they have a Restore Balance in hand. We could have them discard it and then Surgical it, so they can't Restore Balance us, things like that. So I think it has a lot more utility than something like a Fatal Push. So that's how we sideboarded. I do think we should probably have ultimated the Liliana that turn, though, and chosen Jace and Thassa or the 4 mana sources. And didn't matter which pile I guess we would obviously put the Ardent Plate in the border post pile, just so it's not in the Thassa pile. But... Alright, so this hand does some stuff. Like, Wall of Omens isn't great, but I left it in just to draw a card. We can disenchant a border post, and we have a Surgical that could potentially come up. They do have a border post, as they almost always do. We just time walk them here. Fountain, and then up, there's the Stony. Don't need to play it right away because I don't have any border posts. Figure I'd rather draw a card in case I can draw into a Planeswalker. So now they play border post. So we path our own wall. That's the other thing. That's the play that came up against the mono red deck against the burn deck a few rounds ago. So the wall is not great in this matchup, and the path is not great in this matchup. Together, they can replace themselves in Rampant Growth. Rampant Growth is good because now we have Gideon. So now we play Gideon, plus they fetch, and Monastery Siege. So they choose cons. Cons, at the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card, then discard a card. So basically it'd say you get to loot every turn on your draw step. That's pretty good in this matchup. We have a Gideon. So we start, let's draw a card off this wall. All right, now it's interesting, like we want to play the Stony to shut off the border post, but now we need to be thinking, if they cast a Cascade spell and Restore Balance, they're going to kill most of our lands. And if they kill most of our lands, we want to be able to have lands in hand. The other thing we could do, we could play out our lands so that we have no cards in hand. So then when they restore balance, they have to lose all the cards in their hand. Because then we're left with a Gideon. Neither of us have lands, and they don't have mana either because we have a Stony Silence on their border post. But then they have no cards in hand. So they have to recover from a position with no mana and no cards to beat our Gideon. So that's the debate of whether we should keep playing lands or not. Let's see what we do. I went with casting Stony and not playing a land because I figured we could, if we wanted to, Surgical in response and put them down to 2 cards, or we could just leave them with 3 cards. We have lands in hand. But here in this spot, I figured that they probably have, Violent Outburst? Because they have a fetch, which I'm assuming could be able to get green somehow, and then they would go red and then tap this for whatever color, and Violent Outburst into Restore Balance, hitting our Gideon. So my thinking is I want to see their hand here, because Gideon is basically a 2-turn clock, including assuming that they're going to crack the Flooded Strand at some point. And a 2-turn clock is a big deal. Like if they don't have Violent Outburst and they're just representing it because they don't have anything better to do, then we'd rather just kill them in 2 turns with Gideon so that they can't just draw out of it with the Monastery Siege. I think that this was a mistake. I think that I was undervaluing Surgical. I brought in Surgical because it was like just better than a Fatal Push. So I'm like, well, this card at least does something. And so I'm thinking Surgical Extraction in this spot. Okay, well, the doing something it does here is it lets me see their hand to see if they have a Violent Outburst, to see if I want to put them on a 2-turn clock with my Gideon or sit back and wait. But I think I was undervaluing it. I wasn't thinking that this was actually a good card that's going to help me win this game in like an actual spot that is going to be very meaningful, not just look at their hand. So I target their Arid Mesa, and I see that they have Outburst, Jace, As Foretold, Island, and 2 Restore Balances. So this is kind of interesting. I think I don't take their Arid Mesas out of their deck because I don't care if they draw land, even though land, they have the land in hand to cast the Jace if they want to. But again, they're kind of in a spot where they can't really afford to do that because we have a Gideon, and if they play Jace, whatever they do with it, we can attack it for 6 with Gideon. So they basically can't afford to not tap out for Outburst at this point without taking a hit from Gideon. So let's leave this hand revealed. So I have to just plus Gideon. And they do have the green source. Siege, discarding one of the restore balances. And now here is where it would have come up. So regardless of what we did on our turn, they have the siege going, and I should have identified this. When they're looting, they're discarding excess cards. So if they have like 2 of a card, a redundant copy of a card, like Restore Balance, for instance, then they're going to start discarding them. When they're discarding them, they're putting them in the graveyard, which is where we want them to cast the Surgical. So the very next turn, if we just waited one more turn, we just said, plus it, go, I'm not going to play into your Violent Outburst. And then they discard one to the Monastery Siege, then that's awesome. We activate Gideon, attack, they Violent Outburst. In response, we Surgical their Restore Balances. The Violent Eruption, the Violent Outburst resolves. They don't have any Restore Balances left in their deck because we took them all with the Surgical. Then they take 6 and go to 6, and then they're just like basically dead on their turn. Instead, I just tried to play the Surgical to look at their hand, not realizing that the Monastery Siege actually makes the Surgical a really impactful card, and I think that's why I think that's kind of the most important mistake I made in this game. Last game we should have ultimated Liliana at our first opportunity and did Jace and Thassa or everything else. And instead we chose to just minus and kill Thassa and put Jace down to 1 with our Gideon. It ended up costing us the game. We lost to Nahiri before we could get Liliana back up to ultimate. Now here, I think our mistake was just blowing the surgical turn too soon. So now they play as foretold, and so I play Lingering Souls and Flashback, and then for some reason I don't attack with Gideon. Did I even plus it? I did plus it. So I don't remember what my thinking was. If I thought that you could cast Restore Balance off as foretold at instant speed, I don't think that's what I thought. I think I just forgot to attack. I think I was just like, all right, do I flashback Lingering Souls? And I was like, no, I'm not going to flashback Lingering Souls because I want them to restore balance to take away all our creatures, and then we flash it back so we could just attack for 2 multiple times, like for 6 turns, and that's lethal. So it forces them to restore balance. They have 4 lands out, so we're still going to have lands to flash back the souls. So that's what I was thinking. And then meanwhile, I was just like, didn't attack with Gideon. So we just missed a 6-point attack. They should be at 6. And if they're at 6 and we have the spirits in play, then that's a 3-turn clock. And they have to restore balance, then we flash back, then they have to do something about our remaining 2 spirits. So we're actually in a pretty reasonable spot if I just attack with Gideon there, but I didn't. So that was the second biggest mistake. The biggest one was blowing the surgical turn sooner. Second big mistake was not attacking with Gideon when I should have. So now they have Violent Outburst up again, and Restore Balance is still in their library. So we can't attack with Gideon. And since we have nothing else to do, let's give our Spirit Tokens lifelink, make it harder to kill us with Emrakul, I guess. Discard Jace, interesting. Might as well thin our deck. Attack with these spirits again, lifelink again, play Shambling Vent. Drawing a lot of lands. Discards Nahiri, searches out a land, and Nahiri, discarding the other Jace, casting Restore Balance, and this is what they did. So they suspended Gargadon. They, so they got to 3 mana for As Foretold. And off of As Foretold, they cast Violent Outburst to restore balance. And now, in response to the restore balance, they're sacrificing all their lands to the Gargadon. So they're going to Armageddon us, Wrath of God us, and leave us with a Gideon, basically. And again, like, if we attacked with Gideon that one turn, they're at 5 now. So they go down to 1 card, so we just have 1 card in hand. Now, it's actually, we know their last card in hand is Violent Outburst. How did they cast? Oh, they didn't cast, I'm sorry, they cast Restore Balance. They didn't cast the Outburst. So they just cast Restore Balance off the As Foretold. So we know that their final card, because we knew their hand from when we surgical them, and they still haven't played the Outburst. So we know 100% that the last card in their hand is Outburst, and that's why we can't attack with the Gideon there. And I don't play the land here because if we draw a discard spell, I want to play the land and then sack it, play the discard spell, and then attack with Gideon for lethal. Now we played it though because we need it. So now we're like, all right, make you have it, because now Emrakul is going to kill me. Or not make you have it, make you do it. So they do it. And now they just go get Emrakul. I guess they wait a turn because there's no reason to now. But at this point, we're just dead. But basically, yeah, the two big mistakes we made was blowing the surgical for no just to look at their hand, not recognizing how good it is in the face of a monastery siege. Then the second mistake that we made was not attacking with Gideon that one turn for no reason. And the previous game we should have ultimated Liliana and we didn't. So that's kind of the edge that these rogue decks have, where like I've never played against this deck before. I mean, I've played against Restore Balance, but I've never played against this version. And I just don't know what's coming, don't know what's up, and I'm trying to think about all these scenarios I've never been in before. And it's just it's easier to make a mistake against a deck like this than it is against a deck that you've played a number of times and you're playing against like a stock list. Like I know what my plan is against like Slippery Boggle or Affinity or Jund because I've played against those decks, dozens of times. Um, so I'm less likely to make a big picture mistake of how to play the game because like I know what my plan is. But against this deck, that's the value, that's the edge that you get off of rogue decks. That's why Conley Woods made a career off of playing rogue decks because if the opponent doesn't know what you're doing, that's a pretty significant edge. But yeah, I mean those mistakes were just bad mistakes. I mean I'm not trying to make an excuse. They're obviously just not good decisions, but I'm saying I'm more likely, and not just me, but anyone is more likely to make them against rogue decks like this. So this is a pretty sweet deck. I'm sure. I'm sure Jeff is streaming with it. He was probably streaming this match. People watch me make my misplays. But anyway, this is what it looks like from this side. And I figured I'd end with that match because I thought that was a pretty good match against a pretty cool deck, even though it didn't quite go my way. So yeah, anyway, this deck is pretty cool. It's a good matchup against Affinity, good matchup against a lot of the creature decks. We beat Hollow One, we beat Burn, we beat a couple of Affinity decks. It's a little weaker against some of the other combo decks, like Valakut, unless we can get the Field of Ruin surgical combo against them, stuff like that. Um, but yeah, it's good against any of the creature decks, even the mid-range sort of Naya, Jund, Tarmogoyf decks, because we do have all the Wrath effects and Planeswalkers in addition to our point removal and hand discard. So we operate kind of like a Jund deck, but instead of just having creatures like Tarmogoyfs and Dark Confidants, we have Planeswalkers and Wrath effects, which I think one-ups them. So we're just like a little bit bigger of a mid-range deck. So we're just kind of well positioned against the mid-range decks, well positioned against all the creature decks that have trouble dealing with Fatal Push, Path to Exile, and a bunch of Wraths. And we have a sideboard full of cards that come in against like control decks and combo decks and graveyard decks. And as you can see, like Hollow One, we beat them. They did punt the one game, but we put them in a position where they had to top deck on the last turn, and we still beat them 2-0. So we would have had a game 3 anyway, had they not made that mistake. But anyway, yeah, check out this deck if you haven't already. It's been doing well in some GPs and on Magic Online. So I think it's a thing that depending on how the metagame shapes up, it could definitely be a kind of surprise contender.